Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Nightly Offering. Wallace Burnett had been married to Merle for 7 years, and every single night, without fail, she performed the same peculiar ritual. At exactly 10:47 p.m., she would fill a crystal glass with tap water, place it on his bedside table, and say those same cryptic words, "Don't drink this. It's for the house." He'd asked about it once, early in their marriage. Merle had smiled that distant smile of hers and said it was an old family tradition, something about respecting the home spirit. Wallace, a pragmatic architect who spent his days designing structures based on logic and mathematics, had found it quirky but harmless. After all, every relationship required compromises, and if a glass of water kept the peace, so be it. Their home in Ashland, Oregon, was a beautiful craftsman Wallace had designed himself. 2 stories, wrap-around porch, nestled against the forest with mountain views. On paper, they had an enviable life. Wallace's architecture firm was thriving. Merle worked from home as a medical transcriptionist, and they maintained a comfortable routine. But Wallace had begun noticing things. Small things at first. The way Merle sometimes spoke in her sleep, not words exactly, but something rhythmic like a chant. The strange visitors who came when she thought he was at work. People who never knocked on the front door, but appeared at the back entrance near the garden. The locked drawer in her desk that she opened with a key she wore around her neck, never removing it even in sleep. And then there were the headaches. Every morning, Wallace woke with a dull throb behind his eyes that lasted until his first cup of coffee. He'd seen doctors, had brain scans, tried everything. Nothing explained it. The pain had become such a constant companion that he'd stopped mentioning it. On this particular Tuesday evening, Wallace returned home earlier than usual. A client meeting had been canceled, giving him a rare free evening. He pulled into the driveway at 6:30 p.m. to find an unfamiliar black Mercedes parked on the street. Through the kitchen window, he could see shadows moving. Merle wasn't alone. Wallace entered quietly through the front door, his architect's training making him naturally aware of his home's acoustics. Voices drifted from the kitchen, Merle's and a man's deeper tone. "The harvest is almost complete," the man was saying. 7 years as promised. "After tomorrow night's offering, we'll have everything we need." And Wallace, Merle's voice, devoid of the warmth she usually showed him. "He'll never know what he gave us. The binding has worked perfectly. He's been quite productive." Wallace's blood ran cold. He pressed himself against the hallway wall, barely breathing. "Frederick, are you certain he doesn't suspect?" Merle asked. "My dear Merle, the water sees to that. As long as you maintain the nightly ritual, Wallace Burnett remains exactly as he should be. Compliant, unaware, and most importantly, renewable." The word renewable echoed in Wallace's mind like a death knell. He carefully backed toward the front door, stepped outside, and sat in his car with trembling hands. What had he just heard? What was this harvest? And who was Frederick? He waited 30 minutes until the Mercedes drove away, then entered his house as if nothing had happened. Merle greeted him with her usual kiss, asked about his day, and prepared dinner while Wallace mechanically responded, his mind racing. That night, at exactly 10:47 p.m., Merle placed the glass of water on his bedside table. "Don't drink this. It's for the house." Wallace stared at that glass as Merle slipped into bed beside him. For the first time in 7 years, he truly looked at it. The water seemed to shimmer slightly in the moonlight streaming through the window, moving as if stirred by an invisible current. "The house," he repeated softly. "Right?" Merle was asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and regular. Wallace lay awake for hours, watching that glass, feeling the familiar headache building behind his eyes. Tomorrow night's offering, the man had said. The harvest almost complete. Whatever was happening, it ended tomorrow. Wallace Burnett had built his career on understanding structures, on knowing what held things together and what made them fall apart. It was time to deconstruct his marriage and discover what foundation of lies it had been built upon. But first, he needed to know what that water really did. Chapter 2. Breaking the Binding. Wallace spent Wednesday in a fog of paranoia and planning. At his office, he pulled up property records, searching for any connection to the name Frederick. Nothing obvious appeared, but he noted the surname Rivas on several properties that had changed hands in suspicious patterns. Bought low, sold high, always to different LLCs that seemed to evaporate after the transactions. His business partner, Ernest Gifford, knocked on his door around noon. "You look like hell, Wallace. Merle keeping you up late." Ernest grinned, but concern showed in his eyes. "Something like that." Wallace managed to smile. "Ernest, you remember that building inspector who tried to shut down a Morrison project? What was it you said about him?" "Bradley Guzman?" Ernest's expression darkened. "Said he had connections to some weird crowd. Rumors about occult stuff, though nothing proven." "What?" "Just curious about things that don't add up." Wallace logged off his computer. "I'm taking the rest of the day. Need to handle some personal business." He spent the afternoon at the public library, avoiding digital footprints. In the archives, he found old newspaper clippings about a man named Frederick Rivas, a charismatic figure who'd been investigated in the late 90s for running a cult disguised as a wellness center. The case had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but several former members claimed Rivas performed rituals that drained the life from participants. The article included a grainy photo. Wallace recognized him instantly, the man from his kitchen. By the time he returned home at 7 p.m., Wallace had a theory so insane he almost dismissed it. But the headaches, the timing, Merle's strange behavior, it all pointed to something beyond rational explanation. He prepared for bed early, claiming exhaustion. Merle seemed pleased, even affectionate. "You've been working so hard, honey. You deserve rest." At 10:47 p.m., the glass appeared. "Don't drink this. It's for the house." Wallace waited. He listened to Merle's breathing slow, deepen, settle into sleep. Then he waited another hour, watching that shimmering water, feeling the now familiar throb behind his eyes intensify with each passing minute. At 12:15 a.m., driven by equal parts desperation and fury, Wallace sat up and reached for the glass. The water looked normal in the darkness. Just water. But as he raised it to his lips, he noticed his hand shaking. Not from fear, but from resistance, as if his body fought against his will. He drank it in 3 long swallows. The effect was immediate and devastating. The headache exploded into white-hot agony, then vanished completely. His vision blurred, then sharpened to a clarity he'd never experienced. And suddenly, Wallace could see. The walls of his bedroom writhed with symbols, not painted, but present somehow, existing in a spectrum he'd never perceived. They pulsed with a sickly crimson light that seemed to be flowing from him through the floor, down into somewhere else. He looked at his hands and nearly screamed. Thin tendrils of light, like ethereal veins, extended from his chest, his arms, his head, all converging on the empty glass on his nightstand before trailing down through the floor. He was being drained, had been drained, for 7 years. Merle stirred beside him, and Wallace saw the truth of her too. She was wrapped in those same crimson tendrils, but they fed into her rather than away. She was glowing with stolen vitality, and even in sleep, her lips moved in that rhythmic chant. The sound came then, footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate. But they weren't coming from the stairs. They were coming from within the walls themselves. Wallace slid out of bed, his mind reeling, but his body feeling stronger, clearer than it had in years. The door to their bedroom slowly opened, and a figure stepped through, not quite solid, not quite transparent. It wore Frederick Rivas's face, but the eyes were wrong, ancient and hungry. "Interesting," the apparition said, its voice echoing from multiple directions. "No one has ever broken the binding before. The water should have kept you docile until the harvest was complete." It tilted its head, studying Wallace like a specimen. "Do you understand what you've done? Tomorrow night was to be your completion. 7 years and 7 days of slow extraction. You would have simply expired, peacefully, in your sleep, while your wife mourned and collected the life insurance." Wallace backed against the wall, but his fear was transforming into something colder, harder. "What are you?" "A collector," Frederick Shade replied. "And you, Wallace Burnett, are premium stock." An architect, such organized energy, such focused life force. You've been feeding my real self, my physical form, with your essence. The shade smiled. Your wife has been well compensated, of course. Merle understands the value of patience. You're not really here, Wallace said, his architect's mind analyzing even in terror. You're a projection. The water kept me from seeing you, from seeing what was being done to me. Smart boy. The shade stepped closer. But breaking the binding changes nothing. The ritual is too far advanced. You can't stop what's already in motion. Tomorrow night, binding or not, we complete the harvest. Merle knows what to do. The figure dissolved like smoke, but its laughter lingered in the room. Wallace looked at his sleeping wife. This woman he thought he knew, who had been slowly killing him for profit and power. The rage that filled him was pure and focused. He spent the rest of the night in his home office, door locked, planning. The supernatural was real, which meant it had rules. And if it had rules, it had weaknesses. Frederick Rivas wanted to harvest him tomorrow night? Perfect. Wallace would give them a harvest they'd never forget. Chapter 3. Uncovering the Circle. Wallace left the house before dawn, leaving a note saying he had an early client meeting. Merle wouldn't question it. She never did. For 7 years, he'd been the perfect, obedient husband, and that pattern had made him invisible. His first stop was the county clerk's office. Using his professional credentials, he pulled permits and property records for every address connected to Frederick Rivas or his various LLCs. A pattern emerged. 13 properties, all arranged in a specific geographic pattern around Ashland. When he plotted them on a map, they formed a perfect circle with his house, at the exact center. Geometric precision, Wallace muttered, a sick realization dawning. He designed his own cage. The placement of his home, which he thought was his choice, had been influenced, guided. Had any of his decisions been his own? He called Ernest Gifford. I need a favor, and I need you not to ask questions. Wallace, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. I need you to contact Bradley Guzman. Tell him I'm willing to pay for information about Frederick Rivas's current operation. Silence on the line. Then, Jesus, Wallace. What have you gotten into? Something I'm about to get out of. Can you do it? I'll make the call. Bradley Guzman agreed to meet at a diner outside town. He arrived looking nervous, constantly checking the parking lot. The man was in his 50s, weathered and carrying the weight of knowledge he wished he didn't have. I wondered when someone would come asking about Rivas again, Bradley said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. You got caught in his web? My wife is part of his organization. They've been using me for something called a harvest. Bradley's face went pale. Christ. How long? 7 years. Tomorrow night is supposed to be the finale. Then you're already dead, Bradley said flatly. I've seen 3 people go through Rivas's full harvest. They all died exactly on schedule. The autopsies always show natural causes. Heart failure, aneurysm, mysterious stroke. But I knew different. They were used up, emptied out. Tell me how it works. Bradley leaned in, his voice dropping. Rivas discovered something 20 years ago, a ritual that lets him siphon life force from willing donors. But willing is a loose term. If someone in his circle marries you, brings you into a prepared space, performs the nightly ritual, you become a battery. The water isn't magical itself. It's the delivery system for a compound that keeps you from perceiving what's happening. Keeps the dimensional bleed invisible. Dimensional bleed? The draining isn't instant. It happens slowly across the barrier between our reality and somewhere else. That's where Rivas's true form exists now. He's halfway between worlds, sustained by stolen life. The people in his circle, like your wife, they get trickle-down benefits. Extended youth, enhanced vitality, wealth. Bradley finally drank his coffee. There are 13 active feeders at any time, arranged in a geometric pattern. You're the 13th, which means you're the keystone. When you complete tomorrow night, the cycle closes and Rivas fully manifests in our world again. Wallace processed this, his mind racing through possibilities. If I'm a keystone, what happens if I remove myself from the circle? The whole structure becomes unstable. But you can't just leave, Wallace. They've bound you to the location. If you try to get more than 20 miles from your house, you'll feel it, a pull, a compulsion, then physical pain. Eventually, it'll kill you anyway. What if I don't try to leave? Wallace asked. What if I change the structure from within? Bradley raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm an architect. I understand load-bearing elements, stress points, and catastrophic failure cascades. If this ritual has geometric precision, it has structural vulnerabilities. Wallace pulled out his map, showing the circle of properties. I've been studying building collapses my entire career. I know exactly how to make something fall. Rivas won't let you interfere. He'll know the binding broke. Let him know. I want him to come for me. Wallace's smile was cold. Tomorrow night, they expect a harvest. They'll get one, just not the one they planned. Bradley studied Wallace for a long moment. You got that look, like a man with nothing to lose. Wrong, Wallace said. I've got 7 years of my life to take back. That's everything. Bradley reached into his jacket and pulled out a small vial filled with dark red powder. This is ground crimson root mixed with salt consecrated in reverse. Rivas's people hate this stuff. It disrupts their energy flows. I've been carrying it for protection for years. You'll need it more than me. Wallace took the vial. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just survive. And when you bring down Rivas, make it hurt. That bastard has ruined too many lives. Wallace spent the rest of the day preparing. He visited each of the 13 properties, noting their conditions, their vulnerabilities. 3 were abandoned, 2 were occupied by elderly people who seemed dazed and weak, other victims. The remainder appeared to be owned by members of Rivas's circle. At the property directly across from his on the circle's opposite side, he found an interesting detail, a newly installed electrical substation, oversized for the neighborhood's needs. When he checked the permits, forged, using a company that didn't exist, he understood. They were drawing power, real electrical power, to amplify the ritual. He made a call to a former client who worked for the utility company. I need information about an unauthorized electrical draw. As the sun set, Wallace returned home. Merle greeted him with unusual warmth, preparing his favorite meal, being attentive and affectionate. The condemned man's last supper, he realized. She was saying goodbye to her cash cow. You seem different today, Merle said over dinner. More present. I feel good, Wallace replied, matching her smile. Really good, actually. Best I've felt in years. He saw the flicker of concern in her eyes, quickly masked. She knew. They both knew. The game had changed, and tomorrow night would determine who had played it better. At 10:47 p.m., Merle prepared the glass of water, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the nightstand. Don't drink this. It's for the house, she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Of course not, dear, Wallace replied, settling into bed. I've never broken the rules before. Why start now? They lay in darkness, both pretending to sleep, both knowing the other was awake. Outside, the moon rose full and red, and Wallace could feel the pull of the impending ritual like gravity itself. Tomorrow night, Frederick Rivas would learn that even the best designed trap can become a prison for its architect. And Wallace Burnett had just redesigned everything. Chapter 4, The Gathering Storm. Thursday morning arrived with an unnatural stillness. Wallace woke to find Merle already dressed, speaking quietly on her phone in the hallway. He caught fragments. Yes, he knows. No, I can still control it. Frederick, please, trust me. She returned to the bedroom, her face composed. Morning, honey. I have some errands to run today. You'll be home tonight, won't you? We have plans. Wouldn't miss it, Wallace said evenly. After Merle left, Wallace moved quickly. He opened her locked drawer. It took him less than 30 seconds to pick the simple lock. Inside, he found a leather journal filled with Merle's handwriting. The first entry was dated 8 years ago. Frederick showed me the ritual today. 7 years of patient work, and Wallace Burnett will make me wealthy beyond imagining. He's perfect, strong life force, no family to ask questions, and so trusting. I almost feel bad. Almost. Wallace flipped through pages detailing the entire conspiracy. How Frederick Rivas had identified him as a potential donor, how Merle had engineered their meeting at a gallery opening, how every moment of their courtship had been calculated. The ritual requirements were specific. The victim had to willingly enter the prepared home, willingly stay, willingly marry. Each willing choice strengthened the binding. But the most damning entries were recent. Frederick grows impatient. He needs Wallace's harvest to complete his transformation. 13 souls, 13 sacrifices, and he'll walk between worlds permanently. The others in the circle are ready. Tomorrow night, we'll all ascend. So it wasn't just Frederick who benefited. 12 others, including Merle, would share in Wallace's destruction. 13 people who needed to be stopped. Wallace photographed every page, then called Ernest Gifford. I need a group of people tonight. People we can trust. Engineers, contractors, anyone who understands demolition and electricity. Tell them it's an emergency, and tell them to bring any protective gear they have. Wallace, what the hell? Ernest, I'm not crazy, and I'm not exaggerating. There are 13 people planning something terrible tonight, and I'm the target. I can't go to the police because nothing they're doing is technically illegal yet. I need friends. Do you trust me? A long pause. Yes, I trust you. Then bring 10 people to the abandoned warehouse on Siskiyou Boulevard at 7 p.m. And Ernest? Tell them we might be dealing with something beyond normal understanding. If anyone laughs or thinks it's a joke, they shouldn't come. Next, Wallace called his insurance agent. I need to report a gas leak in my property. Severe enough that I'm evacuating for tonight. Yes, I'll file the proper forms. At noon, Frederick Rivas called Wallace's cell phone directly. Mr. Burnett, I think it's time we spoke openly. I'd like that, Wallace said. Come to my office at 2 p.m. Brave or foolish. I'll be there. Wallace prepared his office carefully. He drew symbols on the floor in chalk mixed with Bradley Guzman's crimson root powder, protection circles he'd found referenced in Merle's journal. If Frederick appeared as that shade again, these would at least provide warning. At exactly 2 p.m., Frederick Rivas entered in the flesh. He was tall, distinguished-looking, with silver hair and calculating eyes. He wore an expensive suit and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. You've broken my binding, Frederick said without preamble, studying Wallace from across the desk. Interesting. The water should have been foolproof. Your mistake was assuming I'd stay thirsty forever, Wallace replied. Frederick smiled coldly. Do you understand what you are? What you've been feeding me? He gestured at Wallace's chest. You're a font. Rare, powerful, naturally generating life energy at rates 10 times normal humans. I've been collecting your essence for 7 years, and you've barely diminished. Imagine my disappointment at having to harvest you tonight when you could provide decades more. Why tonight, then? Because the ritual demands completion at exactly 7 years and 7 days. The numerology is critical. But truthfully, Frederick leaned forward. Because you know, an awareness taints the harvest. A struggle, even a metaphysical one, introduces variables I can't control. So come tonight and take me, Wallace challenged. I'll be waiting. Oh, we will. At midnight, the circle activates. There's nowhere you can run that we won't find you, Wallace. You're bound to that property, bound to the circle, bound to your fate. Frederick stood to leave, then paused. Your wife wanted me to spare you, you know. She'd grown fond of her golden goose. But business is business. After Frederick left, Wallace sat in the silence of his office, processing everything. They would come at midnight. They needed him at the house, at the center of their circle. And they thought he was trapped there. They were right, but traps worked both ways. At 7 p.m., Wallace arrived at the warehouse to find 12 people waiting. Ernest Gifford, Bradley Guzman, and 10 others, contractors, electricians, engineers from various projects over the years. Good people he'd worked with trusted. Thank you all for coming, Wallace began. What I'm about to tell you will sound insane. He told them everything. The ritual, the circle, the harvest. He showed them the journal photos, the property maps, the geometric patterns. Some looked skeptical, but Bradley Guzman's corroboration helped, as did the physical evidence of Wallace's improved condition after breaking the binding. So tonight, they're planning to murder you in some magical ritual, Ernest summarized. And you want us to help you? What exactly? Wallace unrolled the plans he drafted. The circle depends on geometric precision. 13 points of power, forming a perfect circle. The ritual draws energy from me, channels it through the properties, feeds it into Frederick Rivas. But every circuit has a point of maximum resistance, a place where the load is greatest. He pointed to the electrical substation. This is their mistake. They're using real electricity to amplify supernatural energy. If we overload the system at exactly the right moment, when they're fully committed to the ritual, the feedback will cascade through the entire circle. Won't that just electrocute you? One of the contractors asked. Ordinarily, yes. But I'm the source, not the conduit. The energy flows from me, not through me. If we reverse the flow. Wallace smiled grimly. Then everyone connected to the ritual gets what was meant for me. That's murder, someone said quietly. Self-defense, Wallace corrected. They're coming to kill me tonight. I'm just changing the terms of engagement. Bradley Guzman nodded slowly. I'll testify to that. I've been tracking Rivas for years. If we can stop him and break his circle permanently. We need teams at 4 locations, Wallace said, assigning positions. Electrical substation, North Node, South Node, and my house. At 11:45 p.m., we begin. By 12:15, it's over, one way or another. Ernest gripped Wallace's shoulder. Brother, I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Wallace admitted. But doing nothing means death. This way I have a chance. As the teams dispersed to their positions, Wallace returned home one final time. Merle's car was in the driveway. He found her in the bedroom, preparing candles, incense, a ceremonial dagger on a velvet cloth. She looked up, startled. Wallace, you're early. Am I? He checked his watch. Still 3 hours until midnight. I thought we should talk first. Really talk for the first time in 7 years. Merle's mask finally cracked. I'm sorry. I truly am. But I was drowning before Frederick found me. Desperation, no way out. He offered me a life I'd never dreamed of, and all it cost was. She gestured weakly at him. My life, Wallace finished. All it cost was my life. You wouldn't have lasted forever anyway, Merle said defensively. Everyone dies eventually. This way, your death has purpose, gives others a chance at something better. Stop, Wallace interrupted, his voice hard. Don't philosophize about murdering me. At least have the decency to own what you are, a killer who married for profit. Merle's face hardened. You think you're better than me? You're just livestock, Wallace. Food. And tonight, you'll serve your purpose whether you cooperate or not. We'll see, Wallace said, and walked out of the house. He had 3 hours to position himself, and an eternity of rage to fuel what came next. Chapter 5. The ritual begins. At 11:30 p.m., Wallace stood in his backyard, looking up at the blood-red moon. He could feel it now, the pull of the ritual starting like hooks in his chest, drawing tight. Around the circle, at each of the 13 properties, he knew the others were gathering. Merle and her 12 co-conspirators, all eager to feast on his stolen life. His phone buzzed. Ernest, in position at substation. This is insane. Bradley, North Node ready. I see 3 people entering the property. Wallace texted the group. Wait for my signal. No matter what you see or hear, wait. At 11:45, the pain started, a pulling sensation as if his very essence was being drawn downward through his feet into the earth. Wallace gritted his teeth and held his ground. The protection circle he'd drawn around himself using Bradley's powder mixture glowed faintly, providing some resistance. Figures emerged from the darkness, 13 of them, moving in synchronized silence. Merle led them, dressed in ceremonial robes. Behind her came Frederick Rivas, and behind him, 11 others Wallace didn't recognize. Their faces were rapturous, hungry. Wallace, Frederick called out. Why resist? You're bound to this spot. Fighting only makes it more painful. I'm not resisting, Wallace replied calmly. I'm exactly where I need to be. The 13 formed a circle around him, just outside his protection boundary. They began to chant in a language Wallace didn't understand, but could feel. Each syllable was like nails dragging across his soul. The air itself seemed to tear, reality becoming thin and translucent. Wallace could see it now without the water suppression, the dimensional bleed, the space between worlds where Frederick had been living, growing fat on stolen life. It looked like a wound in existence, pulsing with dark energy. 7 years, Frederick said, his voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. 7 years of patience culminate now. Your essence will complete my transformation, Wallace Burnett. You should be honored. You'll help birth a god. The chanting intensified. Wallace felt his life force being pulled more violently, could see tendrils of golden light extending from his body toward the circle of cultists. They were drinking him in, their faces glowing with stolen vitality. Wallace checked his watch. 11:58 p.m. Now, he shouted into the night. At the electrical substation, Ernest Gifford and 2 electricians threw the switches they'd prepared, creating a massive power surge. At the north and south nodes, Bradley's teams did the same, deliberately overloading the supernatural circuit with raw electrical current. The effect was immediate. The tendrils of light connecting Wallace to the circle suddenly reversed, crackling with blue electricity. The cultists screamed as the energy they'd been drawing became a flood flowing into them rather than from Wallace. Frederick's eyes widened in shock. What have you done? Redesigned your ritual, Wallace snarled. You built your circle using my house as the focal point, but you relied on mundane electricity to amplify it. Big mistake. Now you're all connected to a circuit carrying 10,000 volts, and I'm the ground. The cultists tried to break the circle to run, but they were locked in place by their own ritual. The chanting had become screaming. One by one, they began to burn from within, their bodies glowing with the same golden light they'd been stealing. Frederick Rivas's physical form was smoking, his flesh unable to contain the reversed flow. You've killed us all, he raged. The feedback will destroy the entire circle, including you. I know, Wallace said, feeling the heat building in his own body. But I'm the source, remember? A font you called me. Let's see how much I can take before I break. The protection circle around Wallace flared brilliant white, the crimson root powder reacting with the energy surge. It was holding, barely, creating just enough insulation to keep him alive while the ritual ate itself from within. At 12:05, the first cultist simply disintegrated, unable to withstand the overload. Then another, and another. Their essences and all the stolen life they carried exploded outward in shockwaves of pure energy. Frederick Rivas fell to his knees, his body flickering between solid matter and the shadow form Wallace had seen in the bedroom. This isn't possible, he whispered. 7 years of planning. Wasted on the wrong victim, Wallace finished. You wanted someone docile, controllable. You got an architect who understands structural failure. Merle was burning now too, her screams cutting through the night. For a moment, their eyes met, and Wallace saw genuine terror there. No more calculations, no more cold manipulation, just a person realizing she'd bet everything and lost. Wallace, please, she gasped. You made your choice, he said coldly. 7 years ago, you chose this. At 12:10, Frederick Rivas exploded in a column of black flame, his existence finally unable to maintain coherence between dimensions. The wound in reality sealed shut with a sound like thunder, and the remaining cultists, 11 including Merle, collapsed simultaneously. The backyard fell silent, except for the crackling of small fires where the cultists had fallen. Wallace remained standing, his protection circle now just ash on the ground. He was alive, exhausted, scorched but alive. Ernest and Bradley came running, followed by the other team members. Holy Mother of God, Ernest breathed, staring at the carnage. It actually worked. Are they? Bradley checked the bodies, looking for pulses. He shook his head slowly. All dead, including Rivas. Wallace looked at Merle's body, feeling nothing. The woman he'd married had never existed, just a mask worn by a killer. We need to document everything. The journal, the ritual setup, Bradley's testimony about Rivas's history. This needs to look like what it is, a cult committing murder and a husband defending himself. As sirens approached in the distance, someone had called about the disturbance. Wallace sat on his porch steps, watching the moon return to its normal color. He'd survived, but more than that, he'd won. "Wallace," Ernest said quietly, sitting beside him. "How are you doing?" "I just killed 13 people," Wallace replied. "How should I be doing?" "You defended yourself against people who were literally draining your life. That's not the same as murder. Tell that to the police." But when the authorities arrived, the physical evidence spoke clearly. The ceremonial setup, Merle's journal documenting the conspiracy, Bradley Guzman's expert testimony about Frederick Rivas's cult, and Wallace's medical records showing unexplained deterioration over 7 years that had mysteriously reversed in the past 2 days. By sunrise, the initial ruling was self-defense against a dangerous cult. The story would take weeks to fully unravel, but Wallace's innocence was never seriously questioned. Still, as he sat in the police station giving his statement, Wallace couldn't shake the image of those 11 cultists burning. They'd chosen to follow Frederick, chosen to participate in murder for personal gain. But had they deserved death? Then he thought about what would have happened if he'd done nothing. How he would have died peacefully in his sleep while Merle collected insurance money and moved on to her next victim. Yes, he decided. They'd earned exactly what they got. Chapter 7. Ashes and Aftermath. The police investigation took 3 weeks. In that time, Wallace lived in a hotel, his house cordoned off as a crime scene. The media descended like vultures, calling it the Harvest Cult murders and dissecting every detail of Frederick Rivas's operation. Bradley Guzman became the prosecution's star witness, providing documentation of 3 previous victims who died under suspicious circumstances, all married to members of Rivas's inner circle, all dying exactly 7 years and 7 days after their weddings. Exhumation orders were issued. Medical examiners found anomalies in the deceased's tissues, cellular degradation consistent with what Wallace had experienced. The case built itself. By the end of week 2, the district attorney's office publicly declared Wallace Burnett a victim and hero who'd stopped a serial killing cult. The FBI opened an investigation into whether Rivas had operated in other cities. But clearing his legal name didn't clear his conscience. Wallace sat in his hotel room, staring at photos on his laptop. 7 years of memories that were all lies. His wedding day, Merle smiling radiantly. Their honeymoon in Hawaii. Anniversary dinners. Birthday celebrations. Every image was a monument to his ignorance. Ernest Gifford knocked on the door, bringing dinner. "You need to eat and talk. You've barely said 10 words since the police released you." "What's there to say?" Wallace pushed the food away. "I was married to a woman who was slowly killing me. I spent 7 years loving someone who never existed. But you're going to waste the rest of your life grieving for a lie." Ernest sat down firmly. "Wallace, you survived something impossible. You're alive, you're healthy, and you're free. Don't let Merle and her bastard friends take anything more from you. They took 7 years. No, they borrowed 7 years. You're getting them back." Ernest gestured at the window. "The housing market's booming. Your firm is drowning in new contracts. People see you as someone who fights back against the darkness. Your story, as traumatic as it is, resonates with people. Use that." Wallace looked at his friend. This man who'd believed him when it sounded crazy, who'd risked his life to help execute an insane plan. "Thank you, Ernest, for everything. Thank me by living, really living, not just surviving." 2 days later, Wallace returned to his house. The police had cleared it, though the backyard remained scorched and empty. He walked through rooms filled with Merle's belongings, evidence of a shared life that had been purely transactional for her. In the bedroom, he found a nightstand where the glass of water had appeared nightly for 7 years. He picked it up, this innocent-looking object that had been his prison, and threw it against the wall. The crystal shattered, and with it, something inside Wallace broke free. He spent the next week purging. Every item of Merle's went into dumpsters. He hired contractors to gut the bedroom, the kitchen, every space where the ritual had touched. If he was keeping the house, and he decided he was, it would be on his terms, not theirs. Bradley Guzman visited on a Thursday afternoon, looking older than when they'd first met at the diner. "Wallace, I need to show you something. They drove to one of the 13 properties, the North Node, where Bradley's team had triggered the power surge. It had been abandoned before, but now it looked different. Dead. The grass was brown despite recent rain, the trees leafless, as if life itself had been scorched from the ground. All 13 properties are like this, Bradley explained. Whatever energy they were channeling, it burned out the land itself when the ritual collapsed. The city's declaring them hazardous. Good, Wallace said. Tear them down. Everyone. Already in progress. But there's something else. Bradley handed him a folder. We found 12 more potential victims. People married to suspected cult members, all following the same pattern. They're alive, still under the binding. The FBI's intervention teams are working to break them free, but... He hesitated. But what? We need someone who understands how the binding works. Someone who broke free and survived. The victims trust you, Wallace. They see you as proof they can escape. Wallace looked at the folder. 12 faces, 12 people living his nightmare. He'd wanted nothing more than to forget, to move on. But these people needed him. When do we start? He asked. Chapter 8, Building Something New. Over the next 3 months, Wallace became an unlikely expert on cult deprogramming and supernatural binding rituals. Working with the FBI and survivors' advocacy groups, he helped identify and free 17 more victims across 4 states. Each case was unique, but the pattern was consistent. People targeted for their life force, slowly drained by romantic partners or trusted friends, all feeding into larger supernatural entities. The work was exhausting and emotionally devastating, but it gave Wallace purpose. Each person he helped free was a small redemption, a way to take the horror he'd experienced and transform it into something meaningful. He also discovered something unexpected. He wasn't alone in being a font. 3 of the victims they freed had the same rare quality, the ability to generate life energy at exceptional rates. The scientific community didn't understand it, couldn't measure it, but those who'd been targets of supernatural predators knew it was real. One of those victims was a woman named Ada Houston, a marine biologist who'd been married to one of Frederick Rivas's disciples. She'd been under her binding for only 2 years when Wallace's actions collapsed the network and freed her indirectly. They met at a survivors' conference in Portland, 6 months after the ritual's destruction. You're the Wallace Burnett, Ada said, approaching him during a break. She was in her early 30s, with kind eyes that carried the weight of trauma survived. Thank you. If you hadn't stopped Rivas, I'd be dead in 5 years. How are you coping? Wallace asked. Some days better than others. You, same. They talked for 3 hours, sharing experiences only they could truly understand. The violation of trust, the horror of realizing you'd been prey, the guilt of not seeing it sooner. For the first time since Merle's death, Wallace felt understood. They began meeting regularly, first as friends, then as something more. Wallace fought it at first, terrified of trusting again, but Ada was patient. I'm not asking you to forget, she told him during a walk along the Pacific coast. I'm asking you to try building something new. We both know what monsters look like now. We'll never be easy marks again. Wallace took her hand, feeling the warmth of genuine connection for the first time in nearly 8 years. New is good. I can work with new. His architecture firm, meanwhile, had exploded in growth. Ernest had been right. People responded to Wallace's story. Clients sought him out specifically, wanting the man who'd outsmarted death to design their homes, their businesses, their lives. Wallace found himself specializing in protective architecture, buildings designed with both physical and metaphysical security in mind. It sounded crazy, but after everything, crazy had become relative. He also started a foundation, the Burnett Initiative, dedicated to helping cult victims and researching supernatural predation. With Ada's help and Bradley Guzman's expertise, they created resources for identifying warning signs, breaking bindings, and prosecuting predators who operated in the shadows between law and magic. 1 year after the ritual's destruction, Wallace stood in his completely renovated home, watching workers complete the final touches. Every room had been rebuilt, redesigned, transformed. The house that had been his prison was now his fortress, and more importantly, his home. Ernest joined him, beer in hand. Not bad for a dead man walking. I prefer survivor of supernatural murder conspiracy, Wallace corrected with a slight smile. Too long for a business card. Ernest clinked bottles. Seriously though, you've done incredible work this year. The foundation, helping those other victims, your relationship with Ada. You've built an entirely new life. Had to, Wallace said. The old one was never really mine. His phone buzzed. A text from Ada. Dinner tonight? I'm making that pasta you liked. Wallace smiled genuinely, feeling something he'd thought was lost forever. Anticipation for the future. I've got plans, he told Ernest. But thank you. For everything. I couldn't have survived this without you. That's what friends are for. Helping you short-circuit supernatural death rituals and rebuild your life. Ernest grinned, though I'm hoping the rest of our friendship is less dramatic. As Ernest left, Wallace stood in his living room, looking at the space he'd created. On the walls were photos of the 17 people he'd helped free, reminder of purpose gained from trauma. On his desk were blueprints for the Foundation's new resource center. And on his phone was a message from a woman who understood him, who'd survived her own nightmare and chosen to keep living. Frederick Rivas had wanted to drain him, to consume him, to reduce him to nothing more than a battery for someone else's ambitions. Instead, Wallace had taken every ounce of pain, every moment of violation, and transformed it into something Rivas could never have anticipated: strength. Chapter 9. The Final Glass. 2 years after the ritual's destruction, Wallace Burnett stood at the altar watching Ada Houston walk toward him in a simple white dress. The wedding was small, just close friends and fellow survivors who understood the significance of choosing to trust again. Ernest Gifford was his best man. Bradley Guzman sat in the front row, having become not just an ally but a true friend. Around them were the faces of 17 people who were alive because Wallace had refused to be a victim. The ceremony was held outdoors, far from any of the tainted properties. As the officiant spoke about love and trust, Wallace thought about Merle, not with anger anymore, but with a strange sort of pity. She'd sold her humanity for power and died with nothing but borrowed life draining away. He'd chosen differently. Do you, Wallace Burnett, take Ada Houston to be your wife? The officiant asked. Wallace looked into Ada's eyes, seeing his own survival reflected back at him. I do. And do you, Ada Houston, take Wallace Burnett to be your husband? I do, she said firmly. When they kissed, the small crowd erupted in genuine joy. No hidden agendas, no dark rituals, just people celebrating two survivors choosing to live fully. At the reception, Ernest made a toast. To Wallace and Ada, two people who looked at evil, said not today, and built something beautiful from the ashes. May your marriage be long, boring, and absolutely free of supernatural drama. I'll drink to that. Wallace laughed, raising his glass. Later, as the party wound down, Bradley pulled Wallace aside. There's something you should know. The FBI's investigation into Rivas's network found evidence of a larger organization. He wasn't operating alone. There are others like him, other collectors scattered across the country. Are we in danger? Wallace asked, immediately alert. No. If anything, they're afraid of you. Word spreads in their community. The man who collapsed an entire ritual circle and killed 13 practitioners? You're a legend among them now. A cautionary tale. Bradley smiled grimly. They won't come near you or anyone associated with you. Good. Wallace looked at Ada, who was laughing with friends. We've earned peace. You have. Use it well. That night, in their new home, a house Wallace had designed specifically for them, with no history of darkness, Ada poured 2 glasses of water before bed. Wallace froze, momentary panic flashing through him. Ada saw his reaction and immediately understood. Oh God, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. She started to dump them out. No, Wallace said, taking the glasses. He handed one to her, kept one for himself. This is different. This is ours. They drank together, sitting on their bed in comfortable silence. No more rituals, Ada said quietly. No more hidden meanings. Just water, Wallace agreed. Sometimes water is just water. He set his empty glass on the nightstand and pulled her close. Outside, the Oregon night was clear and peaceful. No crimson moon, no dimensional bleeding, no hooks in his soul pulling him toward death. Just life. Real, hard-won, genuine life. Wallace Burnett had spent 7 years as prey, 1 night as warrior, and 2 years as healer. Now, finally, he was allowing himself to be something he thought he'd lost forever. Simply human, simply happy. The glass on his nightstand reflected moonlight, clear and innocent and meaningless, exactly as it should be. He'd never take water for granted again, but he'd also never fear it. That was the victory Merle and Frederick could never take from him. The ability to reclaim what they'd corrupted, to transform their weapons into simple, harmless objects. As he drifted off to sleep, Ada's hand in his, Wallace's last thought was of gratitude. For friends who'd believed him, for strength he didn't know he had, and for a future that was finally, completely his own. The ritual was broken. The circle was dust. And Wallace Burnett was free.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.